Hello, everybody. It's Timothy here. So, very exciting stuff on Mythic Spoiler today. So, first off, you can obviously see right away that we've got a little bit of information on the Planeswalker decks from the set. I'll be honest, I'm not really excited about Planeswalker decks. I'm not excited about the actual cards that come in them, but the Planeswalkers are still cool and they do add extra cards. And I'm always excited to see new cards, even if I don't think they're amazing. So, I'll be looking at those, and we actually have some legitimate Kaladesh spoilers today. I'm not sure why they're being spoiled so early ahead of Aether Revolt actually coming out. I think I just said Kaladesh. I meant Aether Revolt, but I have no idea why they're coming out as official spoilers that far ahead, but nonetheless, we have a couple cards to look at here in a second. But we're going to look at the two Planeswalkers first. Remember that even though these cards come in a separate product, they come in the Planeswalker decks, they are still technically standard legal. They're just not designed to be very impactful on standard. They're used as a tool to kind of introduce new players to standard and the idea of how to play with a Planeswalker, since that is such a prevalent thing in constructed formats. But anyway, the first one here is Ajani Valiant Protector, 4 green and white, so same cost as Unyielding down here. Starts at 4 loyalty, and you can +2 to put up to, or you put 2 1/1 counters on up to 1 target creature. You can +1 to reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature. Put that card in your hand and the rest on the bottom in a random order. And then -11 to put X 1/1 counters on target creature. X is your life total, and that creature gains trample until end of turn. So depending on, basically the -11 says if your life total is higher than your opponent's life total, you have a pretty good odd of winning the game here. But -11 is insanely just like way off. So imagine you play this and you +2 right away. It's at 6. Next turn 8, next turn 10, next turn 12, and then finally, if it's not been hit at all, or you never had to +1 it instead of +2ing, like it finally gets to go -11. It's not a practical card at all. It might be fun. I don't really know how the dual decks play, or the Planeswalker decks play against each other. So again, it might be a bit of a fun card here, but the fact that you can't like double in season it, and it's not really impressive. And if you compare it to just like a Johnny Mentor of Heroes abilities, it's just significantly worse in pretty much every way than Mentor of Heroes, and that's a little bit disappointing. But again, the card's not designed to be that impactful, so which really makes me wonder why they're designing these cards in the first place. Like, why not make a good card? I have no idea. But definitely worse than Unyielding by far, but intentionally so. We're going to look at Tezzeret, and keep in mind that we don't have the actual Kaladesh included Tezzeret yet. We have the Planeswalker Tezzeret. So I'm assuming the colors match here. So the Tezzeret we'll be getting from Kaladesh is very likely blue-black. Could be wrong about that. Could be Esper or something like that. But seems like blue-black will match the Kaladesh from the actual set. But this Tezzeret starts at 5 loyalty. Keep in mind we only have 2 Tezzeret cards, whereas Ajani has a bunch of cards where we can kind of like compare and back and forth. Tezzeret only has 2 cards prior to this one, and it's very likely Kaladesh inclusion. So, starting at 5 loyalty, you can +1 to reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal an artifact and put it into your hand. So, basically the same as the Ajani's +1 ability, except for artifacts instead of creatures. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. The -3 says target opponent loses a life, or loses life equal to the number of artifacts you control. Like, if that was -2, I could see this being like maybe just okay, but you know, it's probably going to die. It has to tick back up before it can -3 again. It's just not very good, and realistically, even if you have like, I don't know, 3 artifacts on board when you play this, and then you start minusing it, even if you minus it twice, like it deals 6 damage, so your 6 mana spell dealt 6 damage, and you can do much better rate than that, to be honest. And then the -8 is actually a good -8. It says gain control of all artifacts and creatures target opponent controls. And, you know, that's a permanent effect. It doesn't matter what happens to Tezzeret after that. You just get all of their stuff. And that right there is actually a little bit surprising to me. It makes me believe that maybe it has a place in Commander. I cannot imagine this card has a place in Standard or pretty much anywhere that's not in the Planeswalker deck that it's designed for. But the -8 ability is actually pretty intriguing. It just completely takes over a game. So, you know, if your opponent's playing something like Sidri and their entire, you know, deck is artifacts. Like, you could potentially use this to just take things over. Keep in mind, this shares colors with that new card from the recent Commander decks, the Deep Glow Skate, I believe its name is, where it comes down and doubles counters on any number of permanents, including Tezzeret. So it lets you kind of combine them in Ultimate. But the -8 is very good. The only problem is the other two abilities are really trash, and the 6 mana that you have to invest into this just isn't very likely. And also, it has to survive a total of 3 turns. Like, you play it, tick it up, it's at 6, and then 7, 8, and then finally 9 the third turn after you play it. Just means in Commander, it's never going to live to do that if you're not cheating up its loyalty somehow. So don't realistically ever see these abilities being used, but they are abilities that exist, and you have to be aware of them. One of the risks with cards like this is that they're intentionally designing cards to be not very splashy, not very strong, but they may design them in such a way that they combo with some other card, and you have to be aware that these cards do exist. Anyway, moving on. The rest of these cards here that we're going to see today, and I'm going to look at 5, are actually from the Kaladesh set, as far as I know, and they've got some really cool cards here. So we're going to start with what is perhaps one of the bombiest looking creatures in this format, and we have Smuggler's Copter to compare this to, which is already a pretty high ceiling to overcome considering how much work Smuggler's Copter has been and is still doing in Standard, and even seen it pop up in Legacy and Modern a little bit. But Heart of Kiran, and keep in mind Kiran is the long-lost dead dad of Chandra. Heart of Kiran is 2 mana, just 2, for a legendary artifact vehicle with flying and vigilance. It is a mythic rare. It has crew 3, so you have to tap a number of creatures with total power 3 or greater in order for this to become a creature for the turn. And you may remove a loyalty counter from a Planeswalker you control instead of paying Heart of Kiran's crew cost. So this is really interesting. This lets you play, first off, a very sizable threat in a creature-light deck if you're very high on Planeswalker. So if you're playing something like Esper Control Planeswalkers or something like that in Standard, or maybe Bant Planeswalkers, I have no idea. There's so many Planeswalkers in so many different colors right now, with Shadows over Innistrad and Kaladesh just having more than the usual amount of Planeswalkers, that I could see this being the backbone of a Planeswalker-based deck. And the fact that it has Vigilance means that it's very good at attacking, but you can still leave it back to block. And that's what seems really incredible here, is out of all the things on this card, Vigilance is actually really, really strong. Another note here, like, if we just look at this and Smuggler's Copter side by side, obviously, let's make Smuggler's Copter a little bit smaller, eh? Anyway, if we look at them side by side, we see a lot of similarities, a lot of differences. Smuggler's Copter is just fantastic, and it's not any one thing about it that makes it good, but a combination of all of its parts. It's cheap, it's easy to crew, it has the loot ability, so it has a decent ability on attacks and blocks. It flies, it's pretty sizably costed, or sizably powered, for its mana cost and the initial investment. And if it dies, again, you only invested 2 mana and maybe tap in something like a Thraben Inspector or something, basically losing out on an attack for the turn. Smuggler's Copter has drawn a lot of hate, and people are playing cards like Fragmentize in their sideboard specifically to combat this card and, some other incidental cards. But the thing about Heart of Kiran is it dodges a lot of what Smuggler's Copter doesn't dodge, and that goes for cards like Essence Extraction and Harnessed Lightning. One of the things about Harnessed Lightning, and the reason it gets sideboarded in a lot from like these red-black aggressive decks, is that it's a clean answer to Smuggler's Copter. You don't really have to worry about playing an energy deck in order to take it out, whereas Heart of Kiran will survive an unaided Harnessed Lightning, which is pretty interesting to think about. Smuggler's Copter, obviously played in white-red vehicles, is a little bit stronger since you get access to Depala and you get access to Veteran Motorist, and you can actually make Copter bigger than a 3/3. But if you're doing that to Copter, like, you could be doing the same thing to Heart of Kiran. Turn 2 Heart of Kiran followed by turn 3 Depala and attack for 5 in the air with Vigilance is just insane in my opinion. And if you started off with an aggressive creature like Toolcraft Exemplar, I can't fathom how much damage you can start offloading so quickly. Like, you could have done easily 10 damage by turn 3, which is pretty insane if you ask me. So Heart of Kieran is a very intriguing card. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of back and forth about whether this is better than Copter, whether it is worse. I'm not really going to give a strong opinion about that, and I'll kind of leave my opinions for Heart of Kieran in Limited for when that time comes. Obviously, it's a first pick slam dunk creature, but you have to keep in mind Crew 3 is a significant bit more than Crew 1. So the reason I mention it mostly for Standard is you can still crew Heart of Kieran with a lot of the creatures you normally crew Smuggler's Copter with the exception being in these really small creature white decks that rely on something like Thraven Inspector or something like that to crew it. So you're really looking for your Toolcraft Exemplars, your Scrap Heap Scroungers, things like that to be in your deck in order to reliably crew this Heart. So enough of that. We're going to move on away from these obviously insane cards, and we're going to look at some of the other cards that we have spoiled here. There are 4 cards total, and I think this is Wizards intentionally trying to get a jump on their Story Spotlight cards. So these 4 here are Story Spotlight cards, and it looks like we're missing one. One hasn't been uploaded on Mythic Spoiler yet, so if that's been spoiled already, sorry, I missed it, but if it's on there tomorrow, I'll check it out. Anyway, Disallow is the first one. Obviously, Baral is on here. Baral is the guy from Insidious, Will, and things like that. He's the guy who hunted down Chandra's parents. He's responsible for the death of Kieran, and so on and so forth. And I don't know all of the story facts, but for 1 and double blue, you get an instant that counters target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. And I have to imagine that this just instantly replaces Void Shatter. Void Shatter does have a lot of extra merit in being able to exile. The Dissipate type effect is really good in Standard at the moment, and it has been pretty much the entire time. But this has a little bit more flexibility for the same mana cost, and the fact that you could counter an activated ability or a triggered ability is pretty nice. So you can counter a Planeswalker Ultimate with this, which is something that Blue has trouble with. If you're playing a counter type effect and you actually let your opponent resolve a Planeswalker, you might have a lot of trouble, and they're going to be able to tick up, tick up, tick up. In this case, you can use Disallow to actually counter their Ultimate if it's something like Liliana or maybe Chandra, I have no idea. Even Jace, something like that, Obnixilus, so on and so forth. In other words, this is basically just a cancel, but it has a little bit of extra flexibility, and that leads me to believe that you'll be seeing this a little bit more than cards like Scatter to the Wind or Scatter the Winds, I don't know what it's called, or Void Shatter, just because it is a little bit more flexible at the same mana cost. I am not a blue player by heart. I don't really play counter spells very often in Standard unless I'm really intrigued by something in blue, so I'll leave this to the control players to figure out. Next up is Pia's Revolution. For 2 and a red, it's a rare enchantment. These are all rares, by the way. When a non-token artifact is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return that card to your hand unless target opponent has Pia's Revolution. Deal 3 damage to him or her. So essentially, anytime an artifact, keep in mind, it does say non-token. That's very important, so don't miss out on that. Anytime an artifact goes to your graveyard, put it back in your hand, or your opponent takes 3. It is your opponent's choice. It's not yours. Otherwise, you'd just be doming them for 3, and it doesn't work with tokens, so don't expect to get clue tokens or anything like that back. But this is pretty good. I don't see it in Standard, to be honest. But if you're playing things like Bomat Courier, this is one that really intrigues me. And you're sacking your Bomat Courier, does your opponent really want to take 3? Or do they want you to have Bomat Courier back, right? Scrap Heap Scrounger is a little bit different because you kind of want that card in your graveyard. But if there are artifacts that are really, really cheap and artifacts that you want to be going to your graveyard, then Pia's Revolution has a spot. Again, in Limited, I'm going to kind of keep my opinion about these cards to a little bit of a minimum until I know more about the set. But I imagine this just has to be pretty good in Limited if you're playing with Puzzle Knot type effects where you can sack them for value, and then either your opponent has to give you that card back so you get more value off of it, or they just have to get a Lightning Bolt to the face. It's actually very, very similar to Aetherios God of Passage, which is pretty much the same type of effect for your creatures instead of your artifacts, and a completely different color combination. Aetherios isn't like amazing or anything, but instead of it's basically the reverse. Your opponent has to decide whether or not they're taking damage as opposed to give you life. The difference with Athreos is that a lot of times your opponent will just give you life, right? But with Revolution, it's a little bit weirier when you don't have an infinite supply of life. So, interesting card. Don't know if it'll make standard or not, but I could definitely see it. It has potential to offload a lot of power or at least give you a big advantage. This one is probably the most intriguing for the day. So, Dark Intimations. I'm going to read through it first and then kind of give a couple statements about it. So 2 blue, black, red, and keep in mind this is a Kaladesh card. It's this random Grixis card in a set that I don't really expect to have anything. And it's you'll see in a second. It's a sorcery. Each opponent sacrifices a creature and a creature or a planeswalker, and then discards a card. So automatic 2 for 1. You return a creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand, then draw a card. So automatic 4 for 1 altogether. For 5 mana, you're killing a creature. Your opponent loses a card. You're gaining a creature or planeswalker back from your graveyard, and you are drawing a card. Keep in mind, the sacrifice or creature or planeswalker is up to your opponent to decide. Anyway, after that, this is the intriguing part here. When you cast a Bolas Planeswalker spell, exile Dark Intimations from your graveyard. That planeswalker enters the battlefield with an additional loyalty counter on it. And it's not a May ability if that matters for anything. Anyway, so this will, like, if you see this sort of card, you would automatically assume that there's a Nicol Bolas card in the same set, right? And honestly, I don't think there is. I could be surprised, but the card itself is called Dark Intimations, and if you don't know, Intimations just means like a look into the future, or this like suspicious feeling, or kind of like a sneak peek type thing. So we know that Amonkhet, the next set after Kaladesh and Aether Revolt, is going to be a plane where Nicol Bolas ruled. So I think this is just kind of a teaser, if you will, into the next set, and I think it's really awesome because it has a relevant effect here, and then it has this other bit of flavor on it. But like for all intents and purposes, this might as well be flavor text at the moment, but that flavor text is going to turn into relevant text as soon as we see the next Bolas card. I highly doubt there's a Nicol Bolas in this actual set, but I could be wrong. And the saving grace here in Limited is that, this is a decent effect. Obviously, against some decks, it's not very good, and it's 3 colors. So this is by far not the type of card I would want to open up in Sealed. It's not the type of card that I want in Draft, but if I end up with like a 5-color deck of some sort, it's the type of card you will easily get past multiple times. So, I don't know. It's a little bit of an awkward card. I can imagine it's the type of card where you'll just see it wheel around the table because nobody wants to play it. But it does have a reasonably strong effect. It is a natural 4 for 1, even if you don't get to choose all of the best parts of the card. You do still get kind of some cards back. It's basically a draw 2, and your opponent loses 2 cards. But it's a little bit situational because the best effect on here is making your opponent sack a creature or planeswalker, but since they get to choose, it minimizes how strong this card actually is. I don't think it's amazing by any means, but it is intriguing. It's definitely interesting that it was designed in this way as a look into the future or a look into the next set, and I can only assume that's what it is, but I mean, if we see a Nicol Bolas card in this set, then, we'll have one, but whatever, we'll see. And the last card for today is Battle at the Bridge, featuring some more Tezzeret art, X and black, and it has this ability called Improvise. Your artifacts can help cast this spell. Each artifact you tap after you're done activating a mana abilities pays for 1 colorless mana. So that whole after you've activated mana abilities things, for all purposes, like, it's not really that important. But this is essentially just Convoke for artifacts instead of for creatures. So if we look at a Convoke card, a card with Convoke would allow you to tap your creatures and reduce the cost of the card by 1 colorless, or if you tap, for instance, a white creature for triplicate spirits, you could pay for 1 of the white mana, and it just let you cast spells very, very cheaply, potentially for free. In this case, you're always going to pay at least black, but every artifact essentially adds to X, and keep in mind you can pay mana for X too. And the effect here is that target creature gets -X until end of turn, and you gain X life. So just as kind of a fireball type effect on your opponent's creature, this is quite good. Like, this is definitely a rare that I would first pick most times because A, it seems like premium removal. B, it gains you life. C, it kind of synergizes with an artifact-based deck where you can just go crazy. And it remains to be seen if like Fabricate is in the next set and so on and so forth. Any like as much artifacts, but we already know vehicles are coming back, and we can expect to see plenty of artifacts. So I imagine this card has just got to be really high up the list. Just if you pay 2 mana for this, 1 black and 1, and then you tap 2 artifacts, like target creature gets -3/-3, and you gain 3 life is pretty strong, and you really only invested 2 mana into the card. Yes, you had to tap some things down, but there's some strategic play to that too. But anyway, I'm super stoked that we're getting some of these cards early on. I really want to hear your opinion about Dark Intimations and some of these other cards too. If you disagree with my opinions, or you see that maybe I made a mistake, or you also think that these Planeswalkers are unnecessary, let me know in the comments below. And as always, like, comment, and subscribe. I'd love to talk to you guys about it. My name is Timothy, and I will see you all next time.